The real reason behind China's zero COVID policy, Great Game India reports, most of the Western world is no longer in lockdown, some vaccine mandates are being loosened, mask wearers are distinctly the minority everywhere you look. For now at least, and for want of a better phrase, we have largely gone back to normal, except, now with a totally broken economy, more centralized financial power, dozens of alarming precedents set up for future deployment, and millions upon millions of people injected with various vaccines. But on the lockdown front, at least, we're normal mostly. Lockdowns are quite quickly becoming one of the most embarrassing things that were only ever supported by other people, like wearing flares for voting for Thatcher. Politicians are feverishly passing the buck back and forth, claiming we have never wanted lockdowns in the first place, but not in China. As the rest of the world lives with COVID, people in Chinese cities are still subject to dystopian levels of control and surveillance, up to and including being welded inside their own homes. Why? Well, we can certainly rule out a few mainstream explanations. We know it's not because COVID is a real disease or uniquely dangerous in any way whatsoever. The data has spoken on that. We know it's not because lockdowns work to protect the health of the public or prevent disease outbreaks. The data has spoken on that too. We know it's not because the Chinese government holds the lives of their citizens more precious than their Western counterparts. And we know it's not because they were the victim of some bioengineering viral attack by the West. That idea was always absurd. So what's the real explanation? Well, there are really several answers to that, all of which come back to our old friend, the fake binary. If you accept that the COVID pandemic was in fact a global psyops carried out by most of the governments of the world, working in concert at the behest of supranational financial, corporate, and political interests, then it de facto follows that any apparent differences in approach or attitude between those co-operating governments serve a role in the narrative. In short, someone has to play the bad guy. In this case, China's brutal zero-COVID approach allows the Western governments to claim the moderate label simply by virtue of not being so cartoonish evil as China. The West can say to their citizens, look how brutal China lockdown was. We would never go that far because we care about your rights. Meanwhile, China can say, look how lax and disorganized the West's COVID response was. We would never be that careless because we care about your health. It is, and here is that phrase again, a fake binary. Each side serves as a good guy in their own narrative and the bad guy in the other, but in that fashion they actually support each other whilst corralling each other's dissidents into controlled alternative opinion. And to the promoting vaccines, in The Guardian 2 days ago, the now ubiquitous Devi Sridhar actually defended China's tough decision on zero COVID, coming at it from the angle that China has to be that harsh because their vaccines don't work as well as ours do. China's population has a lower vaccination rate, with vaccines that appear less effective than in most other countries, and many people don't have any immunity gained from a previous infection either. If China gives up on containment and allows a large wave of infections, the country will take a huge loss of life given current vaccination levels. The entire column is really just a way of shilling safe and effective mRNA vaccines, as well as other agenda will below. Rising concerns about the low effectiveness of the non-mRNA Chinese vaccines were also a concern. Studies indicated that protection faded fast and was undetectable after 6 months. China takes it needs to improve its vaccines, but to do this, we will need access to mRNA technology, and this has been stuck at an impasse. Moderna has refused to transfer its technology to Chinese firms for manufacturing. Instead, eager to sell directly to a large market, China has instead worked to develop a homegrown mRNA vaccine, but this has caused delays in rollout. China needs to get mRNA vaccines to the biggest priority groups quickly. Again, the twin-sided narrative. The West says, see, we don't need these brutal lockdowns because we've got the vaccines, with the inevitable unspoken corollary of its being, well, we'll need to go into lockdowns if you don't get vaccinated enough. And meanwhile, China gets to lay the blame for their own lockdowns on Western selfishness. The only reason we have these lockdowns is the mean selfish Western companies won't share their technology. This neatly turns all pro-Chinese voices and Western alternate media voices into pro-vaccine voices too. And 3, feeds the lie that lockdowns work. Lockdowns do not work to halt the spread of disease, and before 2020 were never suggested or used in that manner. Then in the spring of 2020, almost every world government seemingly simultaneously took the unprecedented decision to go into lockdown to fight COVID. To justify this, the mainstream narrative was in need of some evidence lockdown works. Enter China. Over and over and over again, you will read apparent condemnation of China's lockdown alongside the qualification of their supposedly low COVID death numbers. The mainstream sources, in clear implication, it's left unspoken, but prominent alternative voices are happy to say it out loud. These lockdowns may appear unethical, but they save millions of lives. Since all COVID cases are entirely the product of PCR testing programs and all COVID deaths are subject to ludicrously tortured definitions, we can conclude China's COVID statistics are a contrivance designed to sell the idea that lockdowns actually work. More than just lockdowns, an undercurrent of the pandemic narrative has been a softening of the public attitude to authoritarian governance in general, usually through the compliments to China. As early as March 2020, we had experts on Channel 4 praising China's approach. We had Neil Ferguson lamenting the UK government did not have the power to follow China's game plan. We had Western news outlets claiming China had triumphed over COVID. This message was clear and not all that subtle. Man, obviously having no regard for individual rights is bad, but that approach really does seem to work, doesn't it? Clearly we would never do that, but you can't deny it's effective, can you? That message still carries on today, and it has nothing to do with China per se, and everything to do with the slow burn legitimization of tyranny by virtue of ends justifying the means. Conclusion: to sum up, China's zero COVID approach forms a vital piece of the overall pandemic narrative, working in conjunction with Western government as a deliberately stark contrast. It promotes the idea that vaccines work and help to prevent further lockdowns here. It shines a flattering light on Western governments, who appear less draconian by comparison. It serves as an argument for the effectiveness of lockdowns and other authoritarian measures. Perhaps most importantly, the supposed difference works to corral and control public debate. Traditionally, left-wing critics of Western capitalism are forced to defend vaccines and lockdowns by their ideological loyalty to China. Conversely, right-wingers have China's socialist practices to point their fingers at, whilst praising Western capitalist pharmaceutical innovation for saving us from the need for tighter lockdowns. Each side is controlled by their ideology, not realizing their loyalties are being used to position them inside the permissible spectrum of opinion. And all the while, both sides claim the virus is real and dangerous, both sides use the same PCR tests, and both sides shill vaccines made by the same companies. The superficial difference serve only to sell their many points of agreement. In other words, the divide over COVID tactics is as real as the fight over Ukraine. It all serves the same purpose, promoting the Great Reset and the global technocratic government, a system neither communist nor capitalist, but absorbing the worst vices of whilst purging the virtues. Zero COVID is just China working as the other side of the scissors. This is by Kit Knightley, and it's on Great Game India. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.